The
Okay, I've
Arizona
gotcha.
sun beat down mercilessly on the territory like a forge hammer. Jake Morrison sat motionless in his saddle,
Well, look who it
Winchester rifle
is.
balanced
What brings
across
you
his
out this
thighs,
way?
Just
watching his
passing
cattle
through.
seek
Thought
whatever
I'd see a
shade the
friendly
canyon
face.
walls provided. 5 years since
We need
Apache
to leave
raiders had
now.
taken everything that mattered.
This is our land.
5 years of living alone on this hard-scrabble ranch,
Just a
nursing
little higher.
old wounds and older regrets. The sharp crack
I
of
see them.
rifle fire shattered the desert silence. Jake lifted his spyglass, scanning the heat-shimmered wasteland. What he saw through the lens turned his blood to ice. 6 armed riders circled a wooden stake driven deep into the alkali soil. A woman bound to that stake with rawhide rope. One man building a fire while the others watched with obvious satisfaction. They intended to burn her alive. Jake had witnessed enough death for 10 lifetimes. But this crossed a line no decent man could ignore. He spurred his Mustang forward, checking the Winchester's action as he rode hard across the broken ground. The distance closed rapidly under his horse's hooves. 300 yards, 200, 100. "Cut her loose," Jake called across the wasteland, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The men wheeled their mounts to face him. Hard faces under sweat-stained hats, the unmistakable look of professional killers. "Keep riding, old-timer," their leader shouted back, hand resting casually on his gun butt. "This here's private business." Jake's rifle answered him. The 44-40 slug punched the man clean from his saddle before he could clear leather. The second shot dropped another rider reaching for his weapon. Pandemonium erupted as horses reared and men dove for cover behind scattered boulders. The firefight raged fierce but brief. When the gun smoke cleared, 4 bodies lay motionless in the red dirt. 2 survivors had fled into the maze of canyons beyond, leaving crimson trails on the rocks. Jake rode to the stake, already drawing his skinning knife. The woman looked up at him with dark fire burning in her intelligent eyes. Mixed blood, he reckoned. Cherokee and Irish, judging by her high cheekbones and fair skin. "Much obliged, stranger," she said, rubbing circulation back into her rope-burned wrists. Something in her voice triggered a memory, familiar cadence, educated pronunciation. "Do we know each other, miss?" "Dr. Sarah Blackhawk." She stood gracefully, brushing alkali dust from her torn riding dress. "And yes, we've met. 7 years back, Devil's Canyon. You were pinned down by 3 Apache braves during that running fight near the old trading post." The memory struck Jake like a physical blow. That desperate battle, those impossible long-range shots that had saved his life. The phantom marksman who'd vanished before he could offer proper thanks. "You were the sniper firing from the ridge?" Fresh out of veterinary college in Denver, all of 25 and scared witless. Sarah walked to one of the corpses, rolling him over with her boot. "I'm 32 now, not nearly as frightened." A folded telegram fell from the dead man's vest pocket. Jake read it aloud. "Burn the half-breed. Stage it to look Apache. 500 on delivery. HS. Harrison Steele," Sarah said with contempt. "Railroad baron from Philadelphia. He's been buying politicians and bribing territorial officials for months, planning to run track through every ranch and reservation in Arizona." Jake's weathered face hardened like stone, and he needs legal justification to seize the land. He's been systematically poisoning water sources, killing livestock, staging false flag attacks to blame on my father's people. Sarah picked up a Spencer carbine from one of the bodies, checking its mechanism with practiced efficiency. "I've been tracking the pattern for 2 months. That's what got me captured. Your father, Chief Thomas Blackhawk, signed a peace treaty with the territorial government 3 years ago." She met Jake's steady gaze with unflinching resolve. "Steele wants that treaty broken. A tortured Indian chief's daughter would provide perfect justification for military action." Jake studied her composed features. Intelligent, determined, alive when she should be ashes scattered on the desert wind. "What's your next move, Doc?" Prevent a massacre before it starts. She shouldered the carbine with military precision. Beginning with a visit to Sheriff Coleman in Copper Creek, Jake swung back into his saddle, every cavalry instinct screaming warnings. Then we ride, but we ride careful. Something about this whole setup stinks worse than a week-old carcass. The 2-hour journey to Copper Creek gave them opportunity to compare intelligence. Sarah had been methodically documenting the systematic poisoning of waterholes across 3 counties. Always the same pattern. Always blamed on Indian raiders who somehow left no meaningful tracks. Steele has more than hired guns on his payroll, she observed as they crested the final ridge overlooking the settlement. Meaning, someone wearing a badge has been covering his tracks very professionally. Copper Creek sprawled in the valley below like a dying animal. False-fronted buildings lined a single dusty street that hadn't seen traffic in weeks. The sheriff's office occupied the far end, its weathered flag hanging motionless in the dead air. "Ghost town quiet," Jake muttered, studying the empty street through his binoculars. "Middle of the day, and not a soul moving." They approached the settlement on foot, leaving their horses secured at the abandoned livery stable. Too quiet, too still, like the entire place was holding its breath. Sheriff Coleman looked up from his paperwork as they entered his office. Soft hands that had never done hard labor. Pale eyes that never quite met yours directly. The kind of lawman who'd grown comfortable on bribes and graft, Jake reckoned. But something else lurked behind those shifty eyes. Calculation, intelligence, ambition. "Jake Morrison," Coleman said without enthusiasm, setting down his pen with deliberate care. "Heard tell you'd learned to mind your own affairs. Dr. Blackhawk here needs to report an attempted murder." Coleman's attention shifted to Sarah with obvious distaste mixed with something else. "Recognition? That's so. What manner of trouble you been stirring up, girl?" "6 men attempted to burn me alive this morning," Sarah replied with professional detachment. "Mr. Morrison prevented them." "You recognize any of these alleged attackers?" Coleman's tone carried skeptical authority. Sarah reached into her jacket for the telegram. "They were carrying explicit orders from Harrison." Coleman's hand dropped to his gun butt with practiced speed. "Real slow now, Doctor. Real careful." But Jake had been watching the sheriff's eyes throughout the exchange. The moment Sarah mentioned Steele's name, something fundamental had shifted in Coleman's expression. Not surprise, recognition, calculation. "You already know about Steele's operation," Jake said quietly, his own hand moving toward his Colt. Coleman's pistol cleared leather faster than his soft appearance suggested possible. The shot went wide, splintering wood from the door frame as Jake dove left, dragging Sarah with him. His own weapon appeared in his fist as they rolled behind an overturned desk. 2 deputies burst through the back entrance, guns blazing. Jake put a bullet through the first man's chest, rolled aside as Sarah's carbine spoke from the window position. The second deputy staggered backward with a look of profound surprise on his dying face. Coleman had vanished through a side door during the chaos. "He's making for the telegraph office," Sarah shouted over the ringing in their ears. "He'll warn Steele we're on to them." They fought their way out of the building as armed townsmen came running from concealment. Jake took a bullet through his left shoulder, kept moving on pure cavalry discipline and stubborn pride. Sarah's precise shooting cleared their escape route to the horses. They rode hard for Cherokee territory as the sun began its long descent toward the western mountains. Chief Thomas Blackhawk's village nestled in a protected valley where ancient cottonwoods provided blessed shade from the relentless sun. 60 winters had carved deep lines in the chief's noble face, but his back remained straight as a lodgepole pine. Armed warriors emerged from concealment as Jake and Sarah approached, rifles held ready but not threatening. "Stand down," Sarah called in fluent Cherokee. "I bring Jake Morrison, the soldier they call Iron Jake." The chief stepped forward with measured dignity, taking in his daughter's torn clothing and Jake's blood-soaked shirt with a father's concern and a leader's assessment. "Speak," he commanded simply. Sarah quickly explained the morning's events in her father's tongue. Chief Blackhawk's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering over the peaks. Finally, he turned to Jake with searching eyes. "You risked your life for my daughter." "She saved mine years ago at Devil's Canyon," Jake replied honestly. "Seemed only fair to return the favor." Chief Blackhawk nodded slowly, approval flickering across his features. "The cavalry spoke your name with respect, Iron Jake. They said you fought with honor, even when your cause was questionable." Jake accepted the implicit criticism without flinching. "Different war, Chief. Different enemy. But honor's honor, regardless." The chief gestured toward the central fire where several warriors waited. "Sit. We have grave matters to discuss." As Sarah cleaned and bandaged Jake's shoulder wound, her father revealed intelligence gathered through his own extensive network of informants. Steele has been orchestrating this land grab for over a year, buying territorial legislators, corrupting federal agents, even bribing Army quartermasters for supply information. But he requires legal justification to invalidate our treaty. "A war," Jake said grimly. "A massacre," Chief Blackhawk corrected with bitter precision. "He needs my people to attack first. Give the Army clear justification to take everything we have remaining." A young Cherokee warrior approached the fire circle, tall, proud, moving with the fluid grace of a born fighter. Traditional buckskins mixed with modern rifle and cartridge belt. "Daniel Crow Feather," the chief introduced, "my war leader and finest strategist." Daniel studied Jake with calculating dark eyes that missed nothing. "You fought with Custer." "No, 7th Infantry, not 7th Cavalry. Different war entirely." Jake met the warrior's gaze without wavering. "But I've seen enough fighting to recognize when it's unavoidable." "Tomorrow," Daniel said with grim certainty. "Possibly tonight." Steele's hired gun, Blackjack McGraw, has been gathering professional killers all week. 35 men, all experienced, all waiting for the final word. Chief Blackhawk stood, firelight playing across his line features. "There is one defensible position, Crow's Ridge, sacred ground where our ancestors' spirits watch over the living, a narrow canyon where determined men can hold against superior numbers." Jake struggled to his feet, testing his wounded shoulder against the pain. "Tactical situation? Single approach through rocky defile, high ground advantage for defenders, limited cover for attackers," Daniel replied with military precision. "But it means making our final stand on holy ground. Better to fight where your ancestors can witness your courage," Jake said. "They'll understand the necessity." Chief Blackhawk placed his hand on Jake's good shoulder with solemn ceremony. "Will you stand with us, Iron Jake? Will you help us defend what little remains of our homeland?" Jake looked around the fire circle, at Sarah methodically checking her carbine with professional competence, at Daniel sharpening his tomahawk with ritual precision, at the chief bearing the crushing weight of his people's survival on shoulders that had already carried too much sorrow. "I'll stand," he said simply. Deep into the night, an exhausted rider galloped into camp, one of Daniel's scouts, his horse white with foam and trembling from hard running. "They move," the scout reported breathlessly in Cherokee. "McGraw leads them. 40 riders, all heavily armed. They will reach the sacred canyon by sunrise." Chief Blackhawk turned to his war leader with calm resignation. "How many warriors can we field?" 22, Daniel replied after mental calculation. "All proven fighters, but 6 are boys not yet blooded in serious combat." Jake ran the numbers in his experienced head. 40 professional gunmen against 22 defenders, a quarter of them untested. Impossible odds by any reasonable measure. But he'd seen impossible odds overcome before through courage, planning, and sheer bloody-minded determination. "We'll need every advantage the terrain provides," he said. "Position, surprise, and accurate shooting. Sarah stood, slinging her carbine across her shoulders with practiced ease. "Leave the accurate shooting to me." As they prepared to move out for Crow's Ridge, Chief Blackhawk drew Jake aside for private conversation. "There is something crucial you must understand about Sheriff Coleman," the old chief said quietly. "My sources within the territorial government report he has been filing extensive land claims and mineral rights applications. He's not just covering for Steele," Jake realized with growing understanding. "Coleman intends to eliminate his usefulness once the shooting stops. When the smoke clears and bodies are counted, Coleman will emerge as the heroic lawman who tried to maintain peace. The grateful territory will reward his service with prime land grants and mining concessions." Jake's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "Using Steele as a stalking horse. And when Steele has served his purpose, Coleman removes a loose end." Jake checked his weapons one final time. "That man's greed is going to cost a lot of good people their lives." "Not if we stop him first," Chief Blackhawk said with quiet determination. Dawn came gray and cold to Crow's Ridge, casting long shadows across the sacred canyon. Jake positioned himself among the high rocks, overlooking the narrow entrance. Winchester loaded and ready despite the persistent throbbing in his wounded shoulder. Sarah lay prone 15 yards away, her heavy Sharps rifle trained on the distant trail where their enemies would inevitably appear. Below them, Daniel Crow Feather and 21 Cherokee warriors waited in carefully prepared positions among the tumbled boulders and desert scrub. Chief Blackhawk commanded from the canyon center, his calm presence serving as an anchor point for his warriors' courage. They came with the sunrise, a long column of professional killers threading through the canyon approaches. Blackjack McGraw's distinctive silhouette led the procession, the famous gunfighter's reputation preceding him like an evil shadow. Jake counted them through his binoculars. 38 riders, all armed to the teeth, all experienced in their deadly profession. "Hold fire until my signal," Jake whispered, calculating range and wind drift. The column entered the killing ground with military precision. McGraw raised his hand at the canyon mouth, battlefield instincts warning him of invisible danger. Too late. Sarah's Sharp spoke first, the heavy .50 caliber bullet taking the lead scout from his saddle with devastating finality. Jake's Winchester followed instantly, dropping a second rider before he could react. Absolute chaos erupted below as horses reared in terror and men scrambled desperately for whatever cover the canyon offered. The Cherokee attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Daniel led the primary assault from the left flank, his war cry echoing off stone walls as his warriors flowed like deadly water over the rocky terrain. Chief Blackhawk's veteran fighters struck from the right, utilizing every boulder and crevice for tactical advantage. The battle raged for 2 brutal hours, professional killers against desperate defenders fighting for their very existence. Sarah's methodical precision shooting eliminated 13 men from her elevated position. Jake coordinated the overall defense, his cavalry experience reading the ebb and flow of combat, while directing concentrated fire where it would inflict maximum damage. Blackjack McGraw proved his lethal reputation, rallying his scattered forces and organizing devastating return fire that forced the Cherokee to yield precious ground. But the terrain heavily favored defenders familiar with every rock and shadow, and McGraw's hired guns were primarily city fighters unaccustomed to canyon warfare. Then Sheriff Coleman arrived with devastating timing. He appeared at the canyon mouth leading 20 mounted men wearing deputy badges, fresh horses, and full ammunition loads. But instead of reinforcing McGraw's embattled gunmen, Coleman's forces opened fire on Steele's surviving mercenaries. "What in blazing hell?" Jake muttered, unable to comprehend the tactical situation. "He's eliminating all witnesses," Sarah called, understanding flooding her voice. The betrayal unfolded with swift brutality. McGraw died with Coleman's rifle bullet between his shoulder blades, never seeing the shot that ended his infamous career. The remaining hired killers found themselves caught between Cherokee warriors and corrupt lawmen, fighting an impossible two-front battle with no hope of survival. Within 15 minutes, Steele's entire force lay dead or dying in the blood-soaked sand. Now Coleman revealed his true agenda. With the Cherokee blamed for massacring Steele's expedition and his own posse positioned as heroic defenders, he could claim the entire territory under emergency martial law provisions. "Blackhawk!" Coleman's amplified voice echoed through the canyon like thunder. "Send out your daughter and that cavalry bastard. They're wanted for multiple murders." Chief Blackhawk's reply came in rapid, defiant Cherokee. Daniel translated grimly. "He says Coleman is welcome to come take us himself." The final decisive phase of the battle commenced. Coleman's forces spread out with military precision, using professional tactics to pin down the Cherokee defenders. These weren't small-town lawmen, but carefully recruited specialists, probably veteran soldiers hired specifically for this moment of betrayal. Jake realized they needed to break the stalemate before Coleman's superior numbers and ammunition overwhelmed their defensive positions. "Sarah," he called, "can you put a bullet in Coleman from this range?" She studied the distance through her rifle scope with professional assessment. 700 yards through shifting light. Possible shot, but he's staying behind solid cover. "Then I'll flush him into the open." Before anyone could prevent him, Jake stood and walked deliberately down into the exposed canyon floor, his hands held visibly away from his weapons. "Coleman!" he shouted across the battlefield. "You want Iron Jake Morrison? Here I stand." The corrupt sheriff emerged from behind a massive boulder, flanked by 4 heavily armed deputies. "Jake Morrison, the famous Iron Jake, should have stayed on your little ranch, old man." "Maybe so," Jake replied, continuing his steady advance across open ground. "But I never could stomach a man who hides behind a badge while murdering innocent people for profit." Coleman's face twisted with uncontrolled rage. "Innocent? These savages have been raiding and killing for months." "Interesting coincidence," Jake said conversationally, now within effective pistol range. "Every single raid happened to target places you'd already filed territorial claims on. Every murdered homesteader happened to own land you wanted for railroad development." "Prove it in court," Coleman snarled, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon. "Don't need a court," Jake replied with deadly calm. "Just need to stop a murdering snake." Coleman went for his gun with professional speed and lethal intent. Fast, experienced, dangerous, but not quite fast enough. Jake's Colt appeared in his hand like practiced magic, the .45 slug taking Coleman's center mass and spinning him sideways into the canyon wall. The corrupt sheriff's return shot went wide, chipping harmless stone from the rocks above. Coleman's remaining deputies opened fire desperately. Jake dove behind the nearest boulder as the bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. Sarah's rifle cracked from the ridge, dropping 2 men with surgical precision. Daniel's warriors closed from both flanks, tomahawks and war knives finishing what bullets had started. When the final echoes died away, Sheriff Coleman lay gasping in the bloody alkali dust, his grand scheme crumbling around him. "Should have minded your own business," he wheezed, crimson froth staining his lips. "Should have stayed honest," Jake replied without sympathy. Coleman's eyes went empty as the desert wind moaned through the canyon walls. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the imposing federal courthouse in Tucson, facing a stern territorial judge and a gallery packed with newspaper correspondents from as far away as San Francisco and Chicago. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Harrison declared after reviewing the evidence, "the corruption of Coleman and Steele has been thoroughly documented. The territory of Arizona hereby offers you the position of United States Marshal for this entire district." Jake accepted the silver star, pinning it to his vest with quiet ceremony. Someone had to maintain the peace, and he'd learned through bitter experience that peace was something decent men had to fight for constantly. That same evening, in the small stone church at Copper Creek's edge, Jake Morrison married Dr. Sarah Blackhawk in a ceremony that bridged two worlds. Chief Thomas Blackhawk performed the traditional Cherokee blessing under brilliant desert stars. The circuit preacher handled the Christian service by warm lamplight. Daniel Crow Feathers served as best man, still wearing ceremonial war paint from the victory celebration. "You fought with true honor, Iron Jake," he said as the newlyweds emerged from the church into the cool night air. "We all did what was necessary," Jake replied, his arm encircling Sarah's waist protectively. Sarah looked up at her new husband, flickering church lanterns dancing in her intelligent dark eyes. "So what happens now, Marshal Morrison?" "Now we build something worth protecting," Jake said with quiet determination, "starting with a proper home for the three of us." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. Too early for certainty, but a woman understood these things intuitively, new life taking root where death had tried to triumph. The Arizona territory finally knew peace, but in the far distance, a lone rider sat his expensive horse on a rocky prominence, observing the celebration through military binoculars. Eastern clothes, quality equipment, official papers bearing government seals in his saddlebags. He'd traveled west seeking Blackjack McGraw, carrying contracts that would now never be fulfilled. But the railroad still required that valuable land. There were other methods to acquire it, other men to recruit, other strategies to implement. The well-dressed stranger turned his mount eastward, already composing his urgent telegram to powerful men in Washington. The war for Crow's Ridge had ended, but the greater war for the American West was just beginning.